I'm Cassidy Ford, and this is the Franchise Ticker Podcast. It's a home for people, whether you are in the franchise community or not, to live freely in that place where our personal and professional worlds intersect. Welcome to the conversation. Hey guys, it is Cassidy here, and I have Michelle Rowan with me today. This is the inaugural episode of my podcast, The Franchise Ticker. And it is something that's a part of a bigger project, a huge passion project that I have been working on for years at this point, and I'm launching. And originally, I had asked Michelle, she was the first person that I thought of that I wanted to be a guest on my podcast. And we were talking, and she had the idea of just sitting down and having a really frank conversation about what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and about my story. So I am glad to sit down. Michelle, it was a great idea.
Yeah, well, and I think it'll let you kind of put context around why you're doing this. So I'm so happy to be part of it, and really excited to just support the voice, a different voice and a younger voice in what you're doing, and kind of start getting everyone to have these types of conversations.
Yeah, that's exactly what this is all about. And the franchise ticker is, just so you guys know, it's a funny name, right? If you don't know about me, I have Tourette Syndrome. And I'll talk a little bit about that during this conversation. But Tourette Syndrome, if you don't know, is a neurological condition that causes unwanted movements and sounds. So just so you know, if I'm talking, you may not see me tick. So that's kind of a quirk about Tourette's, but you may see me do it here and there. But the franchise ticker is just kind of it's born out of the experiences that I've had with my life bleeding together with franchising and my personal life and everything that kind of has bled together over the years. And we'll talk a lot about kind of what this whole project is today.
Awesome. So Cassidy, I want to start. Well, we were going to talk about how we met, but I want to talk about what was your first job in franchising? How old were you, and what did you first do when you came across franchising?
It actually is a really funny story because I have to back up to kind of put some context around it. That when I was in college, wanted to be an attorney, and everything I did was geared towards being an attorney. And after school, I went to work at a law firm, and my tics, that's what those sounds and those movements are called, are tics. And they got worse and worse and worse because I was so stressed out working at that law firm. And I got to a point where my body was shutting down. And so I had to make a choice of whether I was going to stay there or if I was going to go. So I ended up going, and I had no job, and I ended up working about 5 different odd jobs looking for a permanent position. And what the kind of crazy part of this is that I interviewed with someone and bombed the interview, completely bombed the interview. And he ended up recommending me to someone else. And that person was Yen Young. And he and his brother Peter had founded in 2008 a sushi concept called How Do You Roll. It's a franchise. It was an emerging brand. And I went in and I interviewed with him. I talked to him for 30 minutes. He hired me. He said, "You start the next day." I knew nothing about franchising. And I came in the next day, found out that they had been on Shark Tank the week before. And he sat me down. There's no CRM system. I don't know what an item 19 is or an FTD. He said, "You can say this, you can say this, you cannot say this. Here's 1,500 pieces of paper, 1,500 leads, pick up the phone and start calling." And that's how I got started in franchising.
Okay, so I have some questions just on that first experience. You felt you bombed the interview. Did you ask the guy why he referred you to someone else, or what his take on that interview was?
I think it was really constructive feedback that I received, and it was kind of um, poignant to me because at the time I was really not confident in myself because of everything, my tics and everything that had been going on, the way I left my last job. And he said it came through in the interview. But, I just wasn't a fit for what they needed overall. But I took that. And 2 days later, when I had the next interview with Yen, I decided I'm going to be the most confident person. I'm going to come in and he'll never know that I just kind of like, blew this other opportunity. And, yeah, so I just had to take that, that feedback as much as it hurt and kind of turn that around.
Yeah. So do you I want to talk about kind of what makes you comfortable or uncomfortable when you're talking to Tourette's about Tourette's. But when you're in an interview, is it something that you feel like you want to put out there first and foremost, or how do you introduce to people? Because we can talk about how I found out you had Tourette's, which was you said to me, "You probably know I have Tourette's," and I said, "No, I didn't
Girl.
know. That was the first I'd heard of it."
Yeah.
And probably because I think that I tend to be attracted more to a person's energy.
Yeah.
So I probably wasn't picking up on all of that other than just kind of, you have a great smile, you have a great energy. Our first interactions were always very social. So it wasn't something that I would have been very focused on. So
Yeah.
I didn't know until you told
Yeah.
me that. But I wonder too, I know that I've encountered other people with Tourette's, and it's not something that I've brought up. It's something that I'm like, "Oh, okay. I know that that's what's going on or what I'm seeing." So it's not something that I've ever approached to talk about with someone either. So I'd love to kind of understand in the interview how you bring that up, or just in general, how do you put that forward, and what does make you comfortable or uncomfortable as far as how people
Yeah.
react?
The better question is how I do that when I go on a first date because that but it's actually really similar. And you're right. I don't think it's something that you as another person interacting with me, that's not really the best thing to do is just call that out to me. If it's something, I usually will bring that up first. Um, for an interview, what happens a lot of time is one, it's a great icebreaker. If I walk in and I'm nervous or something, I may, be moving around and I don't want someone to think that I'm antsy or uncomfortable or not confident. So I'll be like, hey, I have Tourette's. It's actually kind of fun. Um, I'll give them an example of, at a last job, my team was so in on it that when I had a whistling tic for a long time and they all set their ringtones on their phone to a whistle. So, and then they started texting each other. So the whole office was full of whistles all the time. So it really is kind of a fun thing sometimes. So I'll just put it out there. And I do think it's all about energy and attitude. And I'm one of the lucky ones too that, not lucky, but I learned very early on because my tics didn't start till I was 17. Most of the time that manifests much earlier on in childhood, that I was mature enough and I had the wherewithal to be able to start suppressing my tics. And so while that is exhausting, it is something that like you may not really realize that that's something that I have, which is a whole other conversation about what I and people like me deal with on the back end of things. So, and in an interview, I Joe Biden, by the way, I've been watching his speeches, and he has a stutter, and I've picked up a stutter tick, which is kind of funny. But in an interview, they'll usually ask, what is something about you that someone may not know or that would make you really great at this job? And that's the first thing that I say. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's also too, my assumption is, and there's a lot I don't know about it, is that the more tired you are, the more frustrated you are, the more stressed you are, it's probably harder to manage through that. So if you're in a place, if you're in an industry you love, if you're in a job you love, my guess is that maybe there's a comfort level there so that you can work through it. But if you're in a high state of exhaustion, like most people, you probably can't manage it as well as you would like to, because it's got to be exhausting is my assumption.
It is. And one of the things that I do it subconsciously now, is suppress my tics around other people. I don't even know, like even my family, like if I'm around anyone, I suppress it, and it's not great for me because as soon as I'm alone, it just explodes. And it can be anything from a screaming tic to a snap to punching something to stomping my feet. Like it runs the whole gambit of things. And so when that happens, it's really frustrating. And there's a really it was embarrassing at first, but the embarrassment doesn't last for very long when you're around the right people and you have a cool team. Is that one day so this is important, is that I have something called coprolalia. And that is, if you think about the fact that only 1% of the American population has a tic disorder, which can be any kind of tic. A lot of times children will have like tics and they grow out of them and that sort of thing. And then 1% of 1% of those people have coprolalia, which is the cursing tic. And most of the time I can whisper that, just like whisper it under my breath or something. But there was a day that I couldn't. I was exhausted and I was with one of my team members at work. We're getting on an elevator, the doors open, and I just dropped this massive like F-bomb. And the woman on the elevator her face, she was so shocked. And so I apologized and said, sorry, I have Tourette's. And I'm not joking, I actually have Tourette's, and it started a conversation. So the more tired you are, you can't just hold it in all the time.
Yeah. So let's talk about when we first met. How old were you when you had your first job in franchising? I know you weren't with How Do I Roll when we met. I think you were at your
yeah, I was in Atlanta at that point. I think I was 26 when we met.
So when I started in franchising, I was 30. So it was 15 years ago. And I think 30 is a young time to start in an industry that you kind of, I will say every job I've had up until I joined Franchise Business Review, I always kind of knew where I was headed or what my direction was. I'd worked at large companies and realized I liked small companies. So I was kind of shifting until I found the right fit. And when I came into franchising, I just saw what I loved about franchising was it's a cliquey industry for the people in the industry, but it's an equal opportunity industry for anybody on the supplier side as a franchisee. And I love that. I love business, and it attracted me to it. So I will say I was 30, which I think is young to come into an industry, but I had a maturity about me in that I had been at other businesses and industries. And so I kind of understood how to help business owners and how to grow a brand from scratch. I was the first employee. And that's the kind of stuff that I picked up on you when I started reading your writing on LinkedIn, and just that you were young, but you had a maturity about you that I really appreciated and I saw. And so what attracted me to you was you wrote a piece that was, I believe it was really calling out IFA for the lack of diversity. And it was done so respectfully and from a place of, I'm part of this community and I want to make it better, not, hey, I'm going to poke all the holes that I see and just complain about it. It was very, very respectful. And so I had reached out to you on that post and said, this is great conversation, and why not be part of how we fix this? Because that was kind of why I got involved with WFC, is let's shine a light on the people that have such great stuff to share in our industry, and let's challenge those thoughts and those ideas and invite people into the conversation to get a little bit uncomfortable and make things better. So I had said, why don't you, and I knew that you had been very involved with the local chapter of the Women's Franchise Network in Atlanta, and you had done some stuff with Clarissa, and you joined our committee. So I just want to kind of thank you for joining our committee.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So I was going to say so how is this helping you? How is joining the committee helping you? Or, I want to understand kind of what you see now that you're working on the committee, the things that we're doing. So what do you see as the stuff that's gotten better since you started in franchising all those years ago? And then where are we headed in the next 10 years too? Where do you want to help improve our industry and our association?
Right. Just so you know, and I don't know if you know this, is that the first time that I was invited to a Southeast Franchise Forum meeting in Atlanta, and then also to the Atlanta chapter of the Women's Franchise Network, I was invited by a 33-year-old woman. And she was the one who got me involved. And she's really the reason. That's Jennifer Benjamin, by the way. She's really the reason that I am involved the way that I am and that I have this outlook, because I was too scared. I had all of these thoughts about what I was in, like what was happening around me, but I didn't feel like I had a voice, and I didn't feel like I had an avenue to express that voice until someone my age said, yes, you do. And that is kind of where that path led through Women's Franchise Network, meeting Clarissa, kind of getting connected with the Women's Franchise Committee, and again with you. And I think that if we talk about the franchise ticker and what I was seeing around me, and I think the reason why I felt like I needed to write that piece is that when I looked at my network, and this is not meant to be like a castigation on any other group of people, but I saw in my network that they were all older, straight, white men. And I noticed that my way of thinking was being constricted by that, and I wasn't making my own active effort to change that. And if I wasn't, and I'm confident and I'm actually involved in things, what's to say that nobody else is doing that either? And so turns out there are people doing that. IFA, there's so many people. Women's Franchise Committee is working so hard to do that. And I think, 10 years from now, I want to see that, what if we're talking about the franchise sticker and what the Women's Franchise Committee has helped me see, and why I'm kind of launching this now, is that we really need to do a better job in promoting vulnerability and connection in and this is what I call the 5 pillars of this movement, so to speak, is what I'm calling it. Women's Franchise Committee is a place where that vulnerability and connection is front and center. I've seen that we need to encourage other women to, I say embrace their inner badass is the way that I put that, of building up new generations of people in the franchise space, whether that is someone my own age or someone who's 30 years older than me. That is a responsibility that we all have. And you took on that when you and I talked about the Women's Franchise Committee, and that's exactly what the IFA is doing through some of its programs. Then, the other communities that we talked about, of the queer community, the people of color, people of all different ability levels, just diversity and equity and inclusion in that. And then also shattering social stigmas. Those are the 5 things that I feel like I have a voice to talk about now, largely because of the people around me, and that includes the Women's Franchise Committee. 10 years from now, I would like to see that these things, that we become comfortable with the uncomfortable, that this is not taboo to talk about, that it's not an effort that we have to do. We don't have to have focused committees to encourage. Those are always going to be there, but this should be the norm. It should be the norm now. But 10 years from now, we should have, more Black and brown faces on our committees. We should have videos on our YouTube channel that have closed captions, or all sorts of things like that. And it just shouldn't be a thought, it just should be. And I think that I just want to help start that conversation a little bit more than it already is happening.
Yeah, I agree. And so, what I always say is that franchising seems to be a little bit behind the rest of the business world, and it has an opportunity to really step up and lead the way, because we have kind of that level playing field. But it's our job to educate people that don't really know about franchising, that the opportunity is there. So I'm exactly with you, is that diversity of thought and people is only going to make our industry stronger. So how do we make sure that young people feel included? Do you remember the whole conversation around certain generations are lazy or they switch
Oh,
jobs all the time, there's no
yeah.
loyalty? Like that drove me crazy. Like you can't bucket an entire generation and say this, and oh, shocking, the older generation thinks the younger is not as good as them. Wait, is it something new?
What? What?
Yeah, instead, let's find the people that are great, that have that inner badass, and
Yeah.
invite them, give them what they need to feel comfortable. So I love
Yeah.
all of this. So you talked about kind of being surrounded by great people. Have you had the opportunity to work for people that aren't so great, and how does that impact your own self-value or your direction in your career or your personal life?
Yes. So it's one of those things that you shouldn't have to, but many times this is what happens is that you learn what not to do before you learn what to do. And that makes it tricky because when you're learning what not to do, you kind of take some of those habits with you everywhere you go and you have to unlearn them. And then you learn what's right. And then you unlearn what's wrong. And then you unlearn, and then you learn what's right. And so it's a process, and it's a process that never ends. But you have to have those people around you. I have worked with some really incredible people that set examples of um, investment. Stan Friedman is one of those people. Now, Stan and I, he's going to be involved in a conversation with me later this year, but he is definitely a different generation than I am. But
Yes.
he has been a champion of mine in so many ways. And while he and I do not see eye to eye on a lot of things, he has just poured so much of himself into me in a way that has helped me grow and given me a lot more confidence. So it's just, you have to find out those people that are going to be willing and happy and excited to do that for you.
Yeah. I will say Stan is one of the first two people that I met through franchising.
Really?
Same thing. I mean, and that's what I think is great, is that there's people that respect and are happy to tell you their story, which you can learn from and
Learn from.
kind of take direction. Stan's been great for women and for all the work he's done in diversity and in
Mhm.
bringing more exposure to that in our industry. So
Yes.
there are great. We should say we encourage straight old white men as well to be part of this. There's a lot to learn from them, right?
Sam, talking to you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I love the 5 pillars, and I'm hoping that you're going to make these available for people to kind of
Yes.
visually understand what you're trying to do within our industry. Anything else that you want to tell us about who you are, your journey so far, or how we can help support kind of this overall conversation? Getting uncomfortable. You did a great piece on people finding out you have Tourette's in the middle of a
Yes.
conversation, and some things that were uncomfortable or some questions that you felt comfortable answering. I think that's
Right.
great. So anything that we can do to help support this conversation starting and happening and be part of your story going forward.
I do think it's just, you can't have a conversation with other people without having a conversation with yourself. And that's the starting point. And if I can do anything, this is not just a podcast that I'm launching. It's a website, it's a blog, it's a video series. There's a lot to this. And if anything, if this spurs just me to have a conversation with myself, maybe maybe none of you out there are gonna tune into this, but maybe one of you will. That's all the goal of this is. So there's a lot to look forward to for me personally, but just having an open mind and remembering that we're not just we're not an island unto ourselves in this industry. I just want to go back to something you said. This is not related to this question, but something you said about the diversity of we're talking about corporate, we're talking about franchisors and suppliers, but think about franchisees. If we start to have a voice that is multiple voices that are from different places, like they are different experiences, then that trickles down into this amazing business model where franchisees start to become more diverse. Franchisees have a different voice. Franchisees are carrying that into the way that they do business and the way that they impact their communities, because these small businesses are so impactful on their communities. So if it's not just us, we're not just doing this to have, a bigger conversation, let's be better people, let's have this shiny exterior. It's something that's important. And I just want people to recognize, if it's not my avenue, if it's not the franchise ticker, do something. Tune in for an episode and see what you think.
Yeah. But well, and I would say too, if you have a story that is around these pillars,
yes.
reach out to you.
Yeah.
And I would also say, make yourself uncomfortable. Have a conversation with someone that's not like you. Get involved in committees. There's a lot of work that needs to happen and be done, and we need volunteers to do that. There's an opportunity to find people that will support you on your journey, or someone that you can help. I mean, even more than what can I get out of it is what can you do for someone else. So I think it is, I just want to make sure everyone feels that they can be part of this, that there's not a reason to not come up and introduce yourself to Cassidy or to myself at an event, or sit in on one of our committee meetings. And that's how you learn about what's happening and what's going on in their industry.
Without the IFA, I think it's one of those things that you can't sit there and wait for someone to invite you to something. When I was in Austin, there wasn't a WFN. There wasn't, a regional body back when I was in Austin. There wasn't an opportunity for me to do that. And it wasn't a center of franchising like it was in Atlanta. And I had to learn, I can't just sit there and wait for someone to invite me to something. Once I made that choice to reach out to someone, then there's a flood of people who will pour themselves into you. And the opportunities that I've had through the IFA and the organizations that are affiliated with it have been phenomenal for me. And the friendships that I've made, it has made a lasting impact on my life. So definitely reach out to us, or, reach out to someone that's involved.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's easier now. I think that with this lengthy quarantine, we're seeing more opportunities to connect with people virtually and be part of these things. All the local WFNs are doing stuff virtually, so you can attend one in California, you can attend one that Philadelphia is doing. So there's a lot more opportunity, I think, to see people and connect with them. So
yeah, it's great.
Let's
perks,
do it.
I guess perks. You gotta look at the bright side.
Yeah.
So,
but I do look forward to when we can all be together again. We're getting closer. All right. So that's the start of the franchise ticker. I look forward to seeing what you put out there. And of course, I'm always happy to contribute to the conversation. So thanks for talking with us about getting this launched.
Thank you for talking to me. That is a vice versa conversation. But this is, like I said at the start of all this, the inaugural episode. I'm going to be doing this in seasons, so between 10 and 15 for this first season, and it's very exciting. So if you, like I said, I'll put those pillars up when I get all this launched. It'll be on my website, and I would love to talk to you guys.
Let's do it.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Franchise Ticker podcast. You can follow the Franchise Ticker on Instagram and Twitter at the handle @FranchiseTicker. Don't forget to subscribe to our videos on YouTube and like, comment, and share. See you on the next episode.